Welcome to Fall Festival. My name is Jenna Hall, and I'm so excited that all of the segments for Fall Festival today are all about automation and tips and tricks on how to use it. And so today, I am gonna start with a simple quilt you can make to practice your automation skills. And this I call the racetrack quilt pattern because it kind of looks like a racetrack, especially if you did like red, white, and black. But today we're gonna do it with some space-themed fabric. Then I'm gonna show you how to quilt it using our brand new automation system, QuiltMotion X Foundations for domestic machines. And that is an automation system that works with any machine on our cutie frame. But first, we gotta make a quilt for it. And so, for my little checkered spots, I got a cute green space alien and a navy blue space alien. And then for my stripes, I'm gonna do a blue and white stripe mixed with this red and dark blue batik that is super duper pretty. First, we gotta cut out our pieces. And for this pattern, you can see that there is a bunch of squares and they're all 5-inch squares, 4.5 finished. And instead of cutting out each of these squares individually, because that's going to take a long time, here's a little tip and trick that you can use on other patterns as well. So first, I already squared off my fabric, and I am going to measure out a 5-inch strip, and I am going to want one from each of my fabrics. Depending on the size of the quilt that you're going to make, I wrote this pattern specifically for crib, small throw, and a large throw. The pattern tells you exactly how many 5-inch strips that you're gonna cut. But what we're gonna do is we are going to open these up all of the way, lay them on top of each other, right sides together, and then sew them together using a 1/4-inch seam allowance. We've got our two pieces sewn together, and when you press them, I usually press towards the dark side, but whatever fabric you decide to press towards, make sure it stays consistent throughout this whole project. That way it will be easier to nest your seams later. And here is another little tip and trick for when you are cutting. We're gonna cut these down into 5-inch strips, but this is just one piece, and for a whole quilt, this is just gonna take forever. So I love stacking my pieces. So with this piece, I'm gonna stack it right on top of this other piece of fabric. And then right here where I pressed my fabric this way, there's a little bump just because there is more fabric underneath that. And then right here, I have my seam going the opposite direction, so I can kind of nest my seams in this a little bit. And before I do any cutting, I just like to make sure to run my finger over this just to make sure those seams are nested. There's no intense gapping, and then we can go ahead and cut. And when cutting these, I like to line up just a random line on my ruler with the seam line so that I know that everything is straight. Perfect. And then I can go ahead and cut my 5-inch strips. Then from here, what I find really cool is because you nested those seams earlier, your pieces are already stacked that you need to sew together. We're gonna sew these together, making sure the same fabrics are diagonal from each other. And just to make sure that our points are good, I'm gonna just pin right where that seam is. And then I can take this to my machine and sew it using a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Then you can press your seams whatever way you like. I like to press mine open. And for this quilt, it really doesn't matter which way you press this seam just because it's gonna be sewn onto one straight piece of fabric, so it doesn't really matter. And I'm just using some starch because I find that helps me get flatter seams. And then because I'm making the throw size quilt option of this, I'm gonna need 5 of these little 4 patches. I can just match up the seams that I pressed to the side, and then I can nest those oh so nicely. Then I'm gonna make 5 rows that have 5 of these 4 patches in each row. For all of the row pieces, I like to press everything open. You can kind of see how on the back, all our seams look nice and even. The middle ones are pressed opposite directions. And then these guys are all pressed open. Once you've got your 5 rows made, we've got to make the sashing, because the sashing is just so fun and adds character. To create the sashing, we're gonna take 2 of what I call C fabric pieces, and in the pattern I call them fabric C, and I call this guy fabric D. And we're gonna sew these 2 pieces to either side of our fabric D to create our sashing. And each of these are 1.5 inches long. And then depending on the size quilts you're gonna make, your sashing pieces may need to be longer than the width of fabric. And I know for a throw size quilt, they definitely need to be longer. And there's 2 ways that you can piece these together. My preferred method is I will sew all of my C strips together, kind of like you would binding, where you layer your pieces perpendicularly, you sew diagonally, and then boom, you have your long piece. Then, because fabric C needs to be put on either side of fabric D, I'll fold my giant long strip of fabric C in half, cut it down the middle, and then I'll do the same thing with fabric D, where I'll just sew all these together, and they don't need to be cut in half because there's only one. Then I can go ahead and sew them on either side in a long strip. Then when I go to add it to my rows, I just cut however long I need. Or what you could do is you could sew these 3 pieces together by your width of fabric, and then do that with all of your C and D pieces, and then just sew them together afterwards in one giant long row and cut them down. When you go to add your sashing to your piece, my biggest advice is to make sure there's at least 1/2 inch of overhang, just because when you sew, every machine pulls fabric at a different rate, your top and bottom fabric, and so just in case things shift around a little bit, you always have a little bit of leeway. And then same on the other end, I'm just gonna leave at least 1/2 inch of extra, and then I have more sashing to add to my other row. My preferred method of adding sashing is to add it to all the rows that need it first, and then piece all of my rows together. And then when I press my sashing, I just like to press it towards the fabric C, just because there are some seams, but there aren't a lot of seams in there. Then I don't cut off the extra until the very end, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Now we're gonna sew all of our rows and sashing together, and I wanna make sure that these seam lines are lined up, and here is how I do it. I'll lay my first row and sashing combination piece on top, then I'll lift up this top piece, and I want to look directly at my seam line, so I see my seam right here, and I want to make sure that this top seam line is connecting, and then I'll make sure that that is all good, everything's lined up, and I'll go through and do that to almost every block. And sometimes I'll put my finger right on top of it just to make sure that it's not moving anywhere. And then I can just pin everything in place, and my seams will line up even though technically they don't need to line up, but I like it when they line up because it looks like one cohesive piece. Then I can sew all of these together, and remember, I still have not cut my pieces or my extra sashing off. Then I can just go through again and press everything to fabric C. And now that we've got the whole thing sewn together, we can cut off that extra sashing we have. And that's just because as we sew, fabric shifts, and so your fabric may not meet perfectly at the ends. So what you can do is just put your ruler against your piece. Make sure at the top and the bottom of that sashing, there is a straight line, and just cut that off. Easy peasy. And if you did a really good job keeping everything straight, you can cut off 2 at once. Woo! And our final step, technically we could call this finished, but if you are a long armer like me and you are someone who may not finish quilts as fast as you hope, also if you are sending your quilt to a long armer, this is my biggest piece of advice. We're gonna do what's called a victory lap. And a victory lap is just where we sew 1/8 inch all the way around our quilt, so that none of your seams come undone while you are waiting to get your quilt quilted. our quilt is officially ready to be quilted. And if you want the pattern, remember to go to graceframe.com and go to the Fall Festival page, and it will be there, and it is for free. And today we are quilting this beautiful quilt we just made on our newest product, which is QuiltMotion X Foundations for domestic machines. And it is an automation system that works with almost every sewing machine that you have at home. And it works with practically every sewing machine because the automation system is attached to the frame. QuiltMotion X Foundations for domestic machines only works with our current model of our cutie frame, and the automation system is hooked up to the frame. So we have belts that run up and down and side to side so that the computer software moves the frame exactly where you need to quilt. And your job is to press the foot pedal so your needle moves up and down and stitches while the software stitches out your design. So that the software knows where it's allowed to quilt, we're gonna home our device. To home my device, I'm gonna pull my machine all the way to the left and all the way back that it will go, and then I can press home device. And what's really cool about this is it is made for newer quilters who don't have a whole lot of space at home or a lot of money dedicated to a big old setup. So it's perfect for someone who wants to start automated quilting at home with the space you have. It starts with a quilter's checklist, which is perfect for a new automated quilter, making sure you have installed a new needle, you've threaded your machine. If your machine has a quilting mode, you switch to the quilting mode, you lower your feed dogs, everything's loaded correctly, and then I can start quilting. And I'm gonna start by picking a design. We can go with a simple block design, or you can do a pantograph design. And for this first part, I wanna do a simple pantograph. And I'm gonna go to the design library. There are 10 designs that come with the system, and then you get 20 credits that goes to our new design store where you can purchase a design to add to your machine. What's really cool is from the software, you can automatically go onto the design store, shop your design, and then once you purchase it, it will automatically end up in your design library. I've chosen a star swirly pantograph, and then I can go ahead and pick my design height. My throat space I know is 8 inches total, and with the frame it takes a couple inches away, so I probably don't want to go more than 5 inches, and I'm going to keep it at a 4-inch pantograph. I can press next, and then I can set my start and end point. Because these are blocks, this is super easy. I'm gonna set my start and end point at the bottom of these blocks. I can start right here, and then I'll put my end point right here. The way pantographs are designed is they are designed in sections, and then you can connect those sections to create one continuous design. I can press next, and here's the fun part. I press move to start. The software takes over, moves to start. I'm gonna make sure my foot is down. I am gonna bring my bobbin up. My bobbin is up, I'm ready to go. I'm holding the foot. You can technically put it on the ground, but for me, this foot pedal is not, or like the cord for the foot pedal is not long enough. So I'm just gonna sit and hold it, and it will all work out in the end. I am gonna set my machine to a speed that I like, and I always start in the middle somewhere and then move it up or down depending on how fast the design is stitching out. But I pressed move to start, I'm gonna press next, and now it can go ahead and sew for me. Once I press start countdown, 3, 2, 1. When it hits 1, I'm gonna start pressing the foot pedal. And it's quilting out. How cool is that? I decided to go with leafy green finesse thread because it matches my design. And as this was quilting out, I'm noticing that I want my stitches to be a little bit bigger. They're really close together, and so I'm just gonna slow down how fast my needle is moving. And what's really cool about this is if you don't have a stitch regulator, you're basically your own stitch regulator, because I'm pressing down the foot as fast as it will go. So my needle is moving up and down at the same pace. And because we're using automation, the system is moving at the same speed throughout this whole pantograph. So I can just sit here and hold this, and my stitches are pretty much regulated. What I've done in the past too when playing around with QMX FD, if you don't want to sit here and hold this foot pedal the whole time, there's so many ways that you can make it so you don't have to sit and hold it. With another machine, the foot pedal was long enough that it reached the floor, and so I used a weight and put it on top of the foot and just stood around and watched it stitch out, so I didn't have to hold it. With this, you do want to watch it because it will tell you when to stop, but your machine, because you're the one controlling your needle's movement, you need to know when you have to stop. But right now, if I wanted to, I could set this down and put something on top of it, and I think it would be fine. Ooh, these stitches are looking so good. I like this pantograph. The stars and swirls are fun. Let me tell you some fun things about QMX FD. You can do block designs, and so if I wanted to put a little astronaut or alien in my little block and do them different sizes, I could. How cute would that be? And if you're like, Jenna, what do I do at the end? Well, when this gets to the end of this row, I'll show you. There is a option to do straight lines, which is really cool. So if you want to do some perfect straight lines, you can. And what I think is really cool is it's so easy to disengage the belts. So if you want to hop from using automation to doing free motion, it is so fast, it takes less than 10 seconds. It's getting towards the end of the design, so I know that the countdown's coming. It does that beep to warn you, and then when the machine stops, you stop. Perfect! Oh my goodness, these stitches look so good. Yay! Now I'm gonna go ahead and cut my thread. And now I've just gotta move my quilt. When you go to roll this up in the menu section, there's something called Quilt Roll Up, where you select the top left, and then you go and select your bottom right. And that just tells you what the new area is, because as you roll up your quilt, you are gonna lose a little bit of space. So I'll take all of my guys off. Now that my quilt has been moved, I can set my new start and end point. And my start point is wherever my old end point was. But I can see where my stitches end, and I know my end point was right on my seam line. So I'm just gonna mark that point as my start point, and then my end point, I want to be over here. And here's what I've noticed. Where my end point is, that's where the pantograph doesn't continue the whole pattern to that end point. So I need to move my actual end point to be able to fit the whole pantograph pattern that I want. So when you're using QMX FD, it's nice to have extra space just in case you need to stitch past a certain point to make sure that your whole quilt is stitched where you want it to be. Now that my start and end points have been placed, I can just press next, move to start, then I can bring my bobbin up. There we go. Then I can sew out the rest of my row. I'm gonna start my new countdown, 3, 2, 1. And it's just gonna sew and do its thing. finished and it looks so good. Oh my goodness. Now we can go ahead and rehoop our cutie like you normally would. So you can take all of these off. With this automation software, when you go to rezone, it's not going to tell you where to put the next row. That is going to be your job. This automation software's job is to stitch things out perfectly and where you tell it to go. So I'm going to remark my start point and I'm going to remark my end point. I'm just using a little piece of chalk. And then I know that my pattern is 4 inches. So I'm going to place my next start point 4 inches plus whatever I want my spacing to be. And normally I do my spacing anywhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. For this one, I'm gonna do 1/2 inch spacing. And so I need to measure out 4.5 inches from that space. And that just happens to be where my seam line is. How nice is that? I'm gonna come down to my end point, measure 4.5. And now I can move my start and end points. Start. Right there, and remember to mark your start and end points. Then I can press move to start again. Perfect. And I'm just gonna repeat this whole process over again. I'm gonna press start the countdown. Once it gets to the right spot, boom, it's gonna start sewing for me. And I'm gonna do this basically for the entire quilt. What I think is so cool about QMX FD is you can really do whatever you want with it. It is up to the way you place your designs. So for example, if you want to place a pantograph that is, let's say, a bunch of flowers just in a row, and on the next row you want them kind of alternating and you want them off-centered a little bit so that they nest into each other, you can do that. All you have to do is the math part of it. And so my pantograph is 4 inches tall, my flower is 4 inches wide. What is half of 4? 2. And then I'll just move it 2 inches to the left, and then my pantograph will stitch out that flower design, kind of nesting it in the row above. What you can do with it is just so fun. It really is up to you and the way you want to use it. You can do block designs, you can do straight lines, you can do pantographs, and if you want a free motion, it's so easy. All you have to do right here is flip this and that disengages the belt. I can free motion and then I can put it back down, and now I'm ready for automation again. How cool is that? And again, if you are wondering if QuiltMotion X Foundations is for you, it works with practically any sewing machine that can drop its feed dogs, and it has a throat length of at least 9 inches. Remember, the software is not connected to your machine, so you're the one controlling your machine. The software is connected to the Cutie Breeze frame, and it only works with our current model of the Cutie Breeze frame. And if you want to learn more, head to graceframe.com. I'm gonna go ahead and quilt out the rest of this. Remember, if you want this free quilt pattern, head to graceframe.com and go to the Fall Festival page. And I hope you have a great rest of Fall Festival. Let's see what's next.